BYU Law School presents The Future of Antitrust. The competition is Collateral, How U.S. Trade Policy is Reshaping the Global Economy conference was held in Washington, D.C. on September 26, 2025. This session is titled, Competing in the New Global Economy.
So I'm really grateful for all of you for being here. I'm grateful for the panelists that have spoken so far, and to Ambassador Tai for her opening remarks, and for our final panel here. Earlier today, we heard from Ambassador Tai discussing these kind of big shifts in the global economy and the global world order and the value systems under which we're organizing that world order. In the second panel, we talked about changes in in the first panel, we talked about changes in U.S. trade policy and that is upending that global order. And we talked about, in the second panel, how antitrust is implicated in this change. What we haven't spent a lot of time talking about is how these changes in U.S. trade policy are on the ground affecting companies and producers and industry. And so the purpose of this final panel is we have with us three people actually operating in industry, as well as Reka joining us from Canada, who spends time thinking deeply and carefully about the role that policies like tariffs and trade and barriers to trade can have on industry. And so we're very excited to have this panel here with us. So I wanted to start just with introductions. So Reka, I'm going to let you go ahead and introduce yourself first, because I've got you up here on the Zoom screen. And then if you want to introduce yourself, tell us a bit about what you do and your area of expertise, and then we'll move down to the rest of the panelists.
Sure. Okay. So thanks so much for the invitation to join today. I'm Reka Juhas. I'm an assistant professor at the Vancouver School of Economics. My main area of research is industrial policy. These days, I like to joke that I was an industrial policy researcher before it became actually policy relevant. And some of my early work was precisely sort of focused on trying to understand how tariff protection can help certain industries become competitive.
Yeah, thank you. Sue-Ann, do you want to introduce yourself next?
Oh, sure. I'm Sue-Ann Song. I am the founder of a consumer goods brand called Appointed. We manufacture in the U.S. paper goods, notebooks, desktop products, and I started the company 10 years ago.
Yeah, thank you. Jenna?
Hi, my name is Jenna Wilson. I'm the co-owner and co-founder of a small business called Ace and Jig. We're in our 17th year of business, and we custom design and create yarn dye woven textiles, working with master weavers in India. We also make clothing and home goods out of it. It's ethically and sustainably made, and then we bring it into the U.S. where we sell it on our website and through retail channels.
Thank you, Jenna. Aaron?
Hello, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. My name is Aaron Lehman. I'm a fifth-generation farmer from central Iowa. I grow corn, soybeans, oats, hay, some dry peas, and a few other things. I farm with my son, Benjamin, and so he's the sixth generation on our farm. I serve as president of the Iowa Farmers Union, which is a general farm organization. We represent about 1,100 farmers around the state of Iowa, mostly small to medium-sized family operations.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you all for being here today. So I wanted to open up this panel by first asking Sue-Ann, Jenna, and Aaron to discuss how they and others they know in your respective industries have been trying to navigate changes in U.S. trade policy in the last 9 months, and which developments specifically have had the biggest impact on your businesses and or industry.
Do you want to start? Sure, I'll start. So the ever-changing and very large tariffs have had a massive impact on our business. As I just mentioned, we make everything in India. Right now, our average tariff is about 66%. Historically, we're used to paying tariffs about 16%. So tariffs are no surprise to us. What is a big surprise is when you are in the middle of producing something. Our production takes about a year. We're fully invested in fabrics, fibers, crops, and suddenly your tariffs go up from 10%, 25%, 50%. So we're trying to navigate a really difficult increase in costs. All of my peers are dealing with a similar problem. And so there's a lot of strategies going on. I see people delaying production. I see people trying to race and get their production here before some of the tariffs went into effect. There's price increases going on. People are taking margin hits, a lot of customer-facing communications, and it's just kind of a little bit like the Wild West, trying to figure it out.
Can I ask just a quick follow-up question on that? So other people in your industry, I imagine not everybody in the textile industry is necessarily anchored to India.
Right.
Are you aware of other companies that are looking at, we talked a lot last night at dinner about difficulties in you changing the location of your manufacturing.
Yeah.
Are other people in your industry better positioned to move production out? Because I think India in particular and China are probably the biggest hit countries right now.
I see bigger business in our sector being able to do a lot that we can't do. But I don't see them bringing it back to the USA. So what we know has been happening with some of the our larger peers or people also in the apparel space who are bigger is they're just moving from country to country. So they were in China, they moved it to India when China was at 50%, and now they're moving it back from India to China. And now that China's back down and India's up to 50%. So they have the ability to kind of nimbly, with their large cash reserves and influence, move from country to country as the tariffs benefit them.
Okay, thank you.
So for me or my company as an American manufacturer, there's less of a significant impact like in Ace and Jig. Though for us, the cost of raw goods have definitely or significantly increased. So that's down the line for us on our supply chain has impacted our business. There's a few other areas where the reciprocal tax or tariffs have impacted our business. So about 20% of our revenue comes from international retailers. About half of that are Canadian retailers. So when there was a reciprocal tariff on consumer goods for the good majority of this year, though I think it's dropped as of September 1st of this year, thankfully, almost all of our Canadian retailers canceled their orders. Either that, and there's a little bit of an anti-American sentiment, though it's hard to put numbers or data against how that's impacted our business. But there's definitely some reactive areas that the business hasn't been impacted. But for us, for sure, it's the supply chain, and it's a longer-term issue for us on the raw goods.
Yeah, thank you, Sue Ann. Aaron?
Yeah, for us on our farm and farmers around the state and around the Midwest for sure, the largest impact we have seen is from retaliatory tariffs from countries that buy a lot of our products. In Iowa, that means in particular soybeans and pork, but it also impacts the corn market and the other commodity market. So prices are dramatically down for those products. That and mixed with a lot of the other factors going on in agriculture right now, it put our farmers at a tremendous amount of stress. We have neighboring states that have had grain terminals, places where farmers take their product either at harvest or at market time, who have told them for the first time in decades that they will not even accept soybeans coming to their local terminal because they normally would be headed on a train, usually west, to be exported, and there just was not enough of a market there. We have not had a soybean bought in this country from our largest buyer of soybeans, China, since May. And we had a decrease from the beginning of the year, even probably a year's time in anticipation of tariffs, to now where they've completely stopped. And so it's meant a huge economic squeeze on our farmers.
Yeah, thank you. So in our prior panel, we were discussing how there may be a tendency when you're facing these times of uncertainty to look to others in your industry to try to figure out how you might try to go about navigating these challenges. But as you're doing that, that might potentially open you and your business up to scrutiny by under antitrust enforcers. And so I was curious to know, is this something that you or others in your industry have been thinking about? And if yes, how are you trying to mitigate those potential risks?
Well, I'll take a first stab at that. So, we like to point out as farmers how farming is unique in our economy, and our structure is unique. And usually that unique structure, that family farm structure, is a strength, right? Having thousands of independent producers throughout the state, throughout the country, helps us. It helps support our local communities. And rather than having one big farmer, having lots of farmers, that supports our local communities. Larger than that, we think there's value in having our food supply dispersed among lots of producers rather than relying on the fate of just a couple farmers, right? That helps us in that regard. And lastly, we think it's good that there are thousands and thousands of farmers out there because they're innovative, right? That size of operation can be very nimble. It can incorporate new technology, new methods, and even address local needs of the community in a very nimble way. So those are three positives. But having that broad network of thousands and thousands of farmers means it's very difficult to bring them all together in ways to respond to large global economic pressures like tariffs. Yes, we have special exemptions for farmers to get together in co-ops, right? That has helped us over the years to become better buyers of inputs, to be better marketers of our product. But those co-ops don't extend across the industry. So even though farmers do cooperate together to gain better market access, better market power, there's too many different players, and all those players are selling to the same 3 or 4 grain companies buying the product. So it's simply not an option for us to find ways to gain market power in this situation to adequately address the problem. We rely on good farm policy as a result, and we have our struggles there too, which we can talk about later. But for a large set of independent producers, it's very, very difficult for us to find a way to gain traction in that sphere.
Can you explain a little bit more about the market structure? So you say you have thousands of farmers, but only 3 or 4 large buyers.
Yeah.
And so what does that? Maybe let's think through a particular agricultural product that you're trying to sell. What does that negotiation process look like in terms of like setting a price and quantity and offloading the crops that have been grown by this disparate collection of farmers?
Yeah, so as a result, farmers, we are price takers, right? The market is what it is from the Chicago Board of Trade that's set, and yes, we have some transparency there. That's important. We have rules on the trade of those commodities in the large scale. Where that means to our local market is that there are costs that are local. It costs more to ship from Iowa as it does from someone who's along the Mississippi River in St. Louis, for instance. But largely, farmers are price takers in this environment. We cannot say, well, we just can't grow it for this. We're going to pass on the cost. We can't do that. So what do farmers do instead? They tighten their belt. So the discussion of the neoliberalism model is, we're racing to the bottom, trying to tighten our belt as much as we can. We put off buying new machinery that needs to be replaced. We put off putting a new innovation on the farm that would help us, but we can't afford the upfront costs. I feel this one in particular. I've got a 25-year-old son who's going to be a great farmer someday if we can find the path for him. Farmers are aging in this country. We have to put those decisions off until we can find a good way. So yes, you can put off some of those things, those investments, but there's a cost of putting it off too. The long-term cost is extreme. So that are some of the consequences of this particular situation.
Yeah, thank you. Sue or Jenna, do either of you want to weigh in on this question?
Well, I thought something that resonated for me in the last panel, in speaking about the antitrust and trade relationship, someone talked about how it could drive consolidation. And I mean, I think that's definitely a fear in my industry, especially as small businesses, are struggling, really struggling. I think we're already seeing some people go away. We're going to see more of that. And what does that mean? It's we're coming in, we're the innovators, we're scrappy, we're doing the best we can. The big guys will survive, and the big guys will make it happen. They probably won't even pay the tariffs because they're going to just find the right place to do what they want to do. So it does, I think, create a problem where we're going to lose some of that rich, kind of like innovative, diverse, kind of small industry coming in and disrupting things. And I think I can see very clearly a pathway to big company survival in our industry.
Yeah, thank you. Sue-Ann?
I think for us, this is definitely reminiscent of during COVID. In my industry, we had a big paper supply chain issue where myself and my competitors, we talked a lot about where to source, how to diversify our supply chain. And so similar to that, we're talking a lot about how can we diversify supply chain on the raw goods and the raw materials. We're mindful of not talking about things like pricing, but at the same time, we are seeing some not excessive, but price gouging on some of the raw materials. And so competitors and I are talking about that almost to help mitigate it for each other. And I think if anything, in my industry, competition is good, and so we want each other to survive this and get through this. Especially most of our competitors within our category, we're one of very few American manufacturers, and so I don't want to see the folks that are importing most of their goods to not survive. So it's mostly just a sharing of information, but being mindful of what.
Yeah, thank you. I like the point that you're raising, that as a purchaser of inputs for your goods, that there is helpful conversations that can happen in terms of identifying when there is price gouging,
Right.
from your perspective as a purchaser of those inputs.
Right. And one thing that we're also doing is one of our a large number of our products have metal wire, and so a lot of us who use that metal wire are putting in purchase orders at the same time so that we can purchase and import together and share the costs of it, which we've never done in the 10 years that I've been in business. And so it's a little bit being scrappy, and then a little bit being resourceful, and then sort of like misery loves company. We're just trying to figure this out together and just sort of weather the storm. Yeah,
thank you. So one of the stated objectives of the recent changes in U.S. trade policy that featured pretty prominently in both Ambassador Tai's remarks and on the first panel is the desire to reshore manufacturing jobs back in the United States. And so, Riga, I wanted to turn to you to see if you could explain a little bit about your research and how findings in your research might inform whether or not this wave of changes in U.S. trade policy may or may not be successful in bringing manufacturing jobs back to the United States.
Sure. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to try to answer this question in two parts. And actually, before I do that, let me just say that I'm so delighted to be sitting on a panel and to be part of a conversation that actually has like real life people and businesses and not just an academic discussion about agents and consumers and suppliers and producers and firms. So I think this is actually to the organizers a shout out that this is quite amazing and quite unique. Bear with me, I'm going to be a little bit abstract for a moment, but I promise we're going somewhere useful. So my research, and I started thinking about industrial policy because I was interested in something that won't sound very familiar to like a US context. So I was interested in how countries that are behind the technology frontier, so that's like a fancy word for saying typically a developing country or a poor country, how countries behind the frontier use different policy tools, tariffs, other tools to try to catch up to the technology frontier. And so this is important because in identifying a rationale for government intervention, as economists, we typically want to see that something in the market is not working as it should. That to sort of use a technical term, there's a market failure, which basically just means that the market is not delivering what is best for society, what is the sort of socially desirable outcome. And in the case of an industry that can't get off the ground in a country, you can identify these sorts of market failure, these reasons why the market is not functioning as it should. So a lot of this it comes down to sort of learning that if you're the first, and some of the panelists have sort of spoken to this, that when you're sort of a scrappy startup firm, it's sort of really, really difficult to get going, particularly if you have zero know-how in your local environment about how a production process works, what are the right technologies, what are the right suppliers for your inputs. And so what I've studied is how tariffs and other tools in the government sort of policy mix can be used to try to facilitate sort of these new industries. Okay, so I have worked on a couple of cases where this type of intervention has been successful in the sense of getting an industry off the ground. And tariffs have sometimes been a tool in that policy mix, but I would first say that tariffs are by far, I think, not the most important tool in this policy mix. So when you think about sort of the situation that these industries are in, they often need technical assistance. They often don't even know what they're doing. And so the package of policies that tend to work may feature sort of temporary protection from much more established competitors, but often a much more important, in my view, part of that bundle is going to be other policies and other help from the government. And very often it's going to be technological transfer policies and other types of sort of government inputs that are helping the industry thrive in the long run. Think of these as sort of research centers, the training of skilled professionals. This is not manufacturing alone. This is, there's agricultural extension services that often come into play about sort of what is the right technology that we should be using, what are the innovations that we should be aware of. And then the third thing I would say that I've often found is extremely important is that the government is a partner to the private sector. The government is working together with the private sector to identify and overcome challenges. So how does this all inform the current US direction? One thing that I would start with when I sort of compare sort of successful cases that I've looked at and the current US strategy is the first thing that sort of strikes me as very different in the current US strategy is that it is extremely horizontal. Right, that we're putting tariffs across the board on everything. Country by country, they vary. They're very unpredictable. But the horizontalness is the first thing that strikes me as running sort of counter to what any theories that I've come across that justify these types of interventions would suggest. So in every case. The idea is you're intervening strategically. You're intervening in a very precise way to fix things that are not working in the market. So to me, it seems hard to understand the current push precisely because it's so broad-based and it's having all of these, if I wanna be very kind in my interpretation, all these unintended consequences where people who are trying to source to produce in the US are facing now massive high input tariffs. So, one of the basic things that I see when I look at 19th century research, 19th century context, is that when you put in place protective tariffs, you reduce the tariffs of the imported inputs because if you're trying to help the downstream industry, if you're trying to help the paper manufacturer downstream, you don't want to make it hard for them to source the necessary inputs from abroad. The second thing I would say is, tariffs, like I said, are one tool in the government's policy mix, but I don't think they're the most important tool. And I think in and of themselves, again, they have a lot of perverse incentives. One of the things we worry about is competition. That if you're creating a cushy, protected domestic market, particularly when there are only a couple of big players, then that is stifling actually the sort of pressure to innovate and to produce products that are cost effective and that consumers want to buy, right? And then the third way in which I think it differs relative to sort of the research or the successful cases that I've looked at is that very often, and you heard this from all the panelists, it doesn't obviously strike you that the government is trying to be a partner to the private sector here. And so here as well, when you look at sort of policy trying to get industries off the ground, you are trying to work with the private sector. You are trying to sort of work with the market economy, help fix the things that are not working, but your partners are the private sector. And so here as well, as you've heard from the other panelists, it often doesn't feel to sort of the participants in the market that the government is sort of their partner and that the government is doing things that are helping them to thrive. So let me, that was very long, but let me stop there.
Yeah, thank you, Reka. So I wanted, so in terms of the remainder of our panel, the only one that's actually doing production outside of the United States that could potentially be doing production in the United States is Jenna. And at dinner last night, Jenna, we were talking a bit about the process by which you decided where you were going to engage in manufacturing and how difficult it would be to actually replicate that process in the United States. Would you mind sharing that a bit with our attendees here?
So my business partner and I were already involved in the fashion industry for many years and became very disenchanted with the way it works and how damaging it can be to the environment, and how disposable so much of what is made is in the fashion industry. It's just trendy, it's disposed of, and we have this huge glut of waste as a result. So we wanted to do something differently, and when we really started thinking about how we could make something that would last and that would be beloved and treasured, we started thinking about fabric. And woven fabric specifically has a really long history on Earth, and so we started thinking about how we could make our own textiles from scratch. This is really not done in our world. So we wanted to do something completely different. This is when I talk about innovating. I think we were truly innovators in this thought process. So we went and we looked all over the world for where we could make these kinds of special woven textiles that brought joy, that brought nostalgia, that could be passed down, could be mended, could be swapped, could be repaired, could be kept for generations. And we ended up finding this kind of enclave of generational weavers in this part of India that had this passion for weaving, where it's in their DNA, it's in the blood, it's in the soul of the place. And we felt like it was an immediate natural connection for what we wanted to achieve. So we've been working with the same group of people, or two different groups of people really, in India to foster this long-standing respect and relationship around our product. It's very symbiotic, and it would be completely counter to what we stand for and do to pluck it up and put it in the US. If there isn't that kind of generational craft type of weaving here. There are weaving cultures here, they're different. There's also not the infrastructure here. The type of infrastructure we need to make our woven fabrics is would be incredibly difficult to recreate here. It would also be incredibly expensive. We just wouldn't have that kind of cash flow. It would take a lot of time, and it would take people who are interested in weaving and on that level to be trained, and it's such a light year away that it's really not something that we can do at this point.
Yeah, thank you. So it seems like you're echoing some of the things that Reka said in her comments, that if the United States is serious for a particular industry to actually re-onshore manufacturing jobs in a particular industry, that it's going to take more than just imposing tariffs, but the industry is going to need support and a cohesive policy that's going to actually build out infrastructure to make that to be achievable. One thing that another theme that Reka highlighted, even though she wasn't here for the earlier discussions that we had today, I think it's the first panel we talked about how there's there's multifaceted objectives, I think is maybe one way to say it, of what the Trump administration is trying to achieve with its tariffs. One of those objectives, in some instances, I think, is re-onshoring jobs. But then we're also using, we the United States, are also using tariffs as a means to create leverage in getting countries to do other things that we want them to do geopolitically. So unfortunately for ACE and JIG, I don't think one of the U.S. objectives is to re-onshore textile manufacturing, but they want India to stop buying Russian fuel.
Right.
Is what they're.
We're caught in that crosshair for sure.
Yeah, and so you can imagine. I think the 232 tariffs that were announced yesterday. That's more of a targeted approach. Like I can imagine more re-onshoring of pharmaceutical production, for example. And so I think to the extent that if you're in an industry where the long-term goal is re-onshoring, but I think unfortunately in your case, we're just waiting for India to comply with what the U.S. wants India to do.
Right. I mean, and then there's a few theories around that, but there's definitely the public-facing motivation, which is the Russian oil. There's also, like, if you listen to the New York Times, it has to do with the Nobel Peace Prize. There's the U.S.'s interest in the agriculture of India. So there's a lot of reasons there. None of them really seem to have to do with the re-onshoring of jobs here. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So a follow-up to the prior question. Actually, I think we've touched a bit on this. So I have another question that I wanted to ask to Rekha. So it's actually for the entire panel, but we're going to let Rekha take a first pass at this. So if you could advise the United States on next steps to take in its evolving trade policy, what would you ask them to do? And how would this affect, in Rekha's case, just U.S. businesses, customers, and employees? And for the panelists here in the room, specifically, how would what you would ask for or recommend, how would it actually affect your business, employees, and customers?
Yeah, so I thought about this question. It's a tricky one. My list is so long, but I think the spirit of what I would say is to try to find a more collaborative approach, one that sort of invites comments from academics who have studied these policies, who have sort of expertise in this area. One is to invite sort of input from the private sector, the people who are affected. I think one of the things that I teach to my undergraduates is that our globalized sort of trading system has become extremely complicated. Very often, this is probably not news to a lot of the panelists, but very often you don't know who your supplier is. There's no reason typically for you to know who is supplying the person you buy from, which means that you don't even necessarily understand what the knock-on effects are going to be when your supplier's supplier is affected. Which means that when you come out with like a specific policy that is very drastic and where you haven't sort of invited input from those affected, invited input from experts, it has the potential to have these massive unintended consequences. And we see sort of a lot of that kind of rippling through. The administration announces something, then they sort of learn about what the unintended consequences of that are, and then a certain subset of those affected, typically those echoing things that have been brought up in the panel, typically those who are big enough and have the ear of the administration, they sort of get to talk to the administration. They get a particular carve out for the product that they're producing, but then there is a whole sort of part of society where the inputs don't get heard, because of course this is typically not how we do policy. So I think if I were to sort of think about one thing that I would sort of try to advise the administration on, it would be to sort of invite more discussion of these policies and get feedback before these are done. So in industrial policy research, we think that the best types of industrial policy are those where the government has embedded autonomy. It's like a complicated word, but basically it means that the government is embedded because it has dense networks to the private sector. It actually has a dialogue with the private sector, understanding sort of what the private sector needs, where the private sector is stuck, but of course we don't want it to be captured by the private sector. That's where the autonomous part comes in. So I don't think that the current, if I want to think of sort of the onshoring aim of the current administration's policy, I don't think we have the sort of embedded autonomy that we would like to have, where the decision making is sort of happening in collaboration with stakeholders. And then the second thing, just to sort of plug something, Cree, that you were saying is, yes, I think you know, I've focused very narrowly on my area of expertise, which is the industrial policy angle. But of course, one sort of very difficult thing with thinking about these tariffs is that the tariffs also have multiple uses for this administration, and so it's very difficult to see sort of which, you know, because of the fact that the tariffs are being used to achieve multiple ends. It is often the case that one aim might contradict a different aim that these tariffs are trying to achieve. So I think that's another thing that makes this really difficult.
Yeah, thank you. Opening it up for the rest of the panel. Sue-Ann?
So I agree with everything that Reka is saying, and I was interested to hear what she was going to say. I'm a proponent of American manufacturing when it makes sense, and I have a very good understanding of American manufacturing. I think in Jenna's case, it doesn't make sense. It's not part of the fiber of her brand. But I think American manufacturing is very, very difficult. Manufacturing in itself, the margins are very, very slim. And so I think in order to advocate for American manufacturing, I think there has to be balance. I think it's very, as Reka was saying, very horizontal right now. It's very black and white. And it's even for, I think, a company like mine that is an American manufacturer has negative impact on us. I think for us, we'll be able to get through this and sort of weather through this, and it'll have some impact on our bottom line. But in order for our partners to be able to manufacture in the U.S., I think there has to be, you know, exceptions like exemptions to raw materials or the inputs that have to be imported, or access to fair trade and open market. I don't think it can't be as black and white as it has been, and so I think it's possible, but it's at this point it's difficult, and if anything, it's probably more difficult now.
I feel like, so just speaking about, you know, private sector having inputs, and I think we have a lot we would love to share with this administration and with the policymakers implementing the tariffs. I think something of interest to me, it is, you know, a lot of my peer brands are sewing here stateside. They're super impacted by the tariff structure right now, because the reality of silk and other materials is they don't come from America. So the apparel industry is typically has a lot of global inputs. And so some of the people I know being impacted the hardest in the apparel industry are made in America brands. So, I think as far as, you know, when we're in an election cycle, we hear a lot about small businesses, and then we don't hear about it again until the next election cycle. Same with farmers.
Yes, that's right.
So I think something that would be interesting for people based here struggling through this is what is the partnership between the government and the private sector? So I know, like Rick is saying, there really doesn't feel like there is partnership, but being familiar with some of the policies that are going on in Canada, for example, you know, how could the government support some of these small businesses to develop their business here, or to do something differently here? That people don't just have money to do that kind of thing that's liquid, especially if you're a small business. So I think the input from the private sectors would be great. I think there's just a lot I could say about it.
Well, to that point, farmers have traditionally played a very large role in trying to reach out to foreign markets because we rely on them quite heavily. For the corn, soy, and soybeans we produce, corn, for instance, traditionally, it's changing a little bit over the past few years, but traditionally we feed about a third of our corn. We use about a third for ethanol, renewable fuels, and then we export the rest. We are heavily dependent on these export markets. Soybeans also, the numbers are a little bit different. So our farmers are used to joining organizations that are dedicated to fostering these markets overseas. They invest in it. They use some of their own dollars to go to develop these relationships, and it takes time, right? You have to build a good relationship, be a good partner, work through the differences in good faith, and build off of those relationships. Unfortunately, the rug can get pulled out very, very quickly, and all that investment can really be damaged very, very quickly. 5 years ago, we had relationships with Chinese buyers of our soybeans, and because of the tariff situation then, they went to farmers in other countries, lots of places, but in particular farmers in Brazil. A lot of those buyers have not come back to us. In addition, there are programs that help build good relationships, that the USAID program. We were considered a very good partner with countries by supplying grain in the USAID program. We yanked that program out from farmers in this country, but from our partners around the world. That also says, are we really talking with a group of American farmers and the industry that can be a reliable partner? All that really hurts. So a couple pieces of advice, right? Let's not use the chaotic trade approach. Let's use the collaborative trade approach that identifies issues and in good faith tries to address them. When we do have a good agreement, I think we need to make sure those benefits reach all the way down to the farm. And I brought my little prop here. One thing that we've been working on is we would, I'll start by looking at the hat. I can look at my hat and it says, made with pride in the United States of America. We want to do that with our meat. We want to have a label that says that this meat is made in the USA. We think customers want it. All consumer data tells us that customers want it. We passed a law to do it. But that ran afoul of international trade agreements where eventually we had to withdraw, and our farmers can't have a label that says that it is, you can have a voluntary label, but we made a decision as an industry, as a country, to have a label. We can't have it because it ran afoul of trade agreements. Here's another example. When I'm on my farm and I have a problem with my pickup, or you have a problem with your pickup, we can repair it ourselves, right? We can access all the material online and all the know-how. That's not the case with all of our farm machinery, especially the new innovative, expensive farm machinery has restrictions on the ability of farmers to repair their own equipment. Now that's starting to change. Some states have passed laws, and we're working through other issues with the FTC on that. But a trade agreement shouldn't restrict our ability to say that farmers need to have the ability to repair this equipment. So those are two ways that we shouldn't be meddling in our priorities through trade agreements. So that's something as we move into what happens next, we need to keep in mind. Let's keep those benefits coming all the way back to the farm. In addition to that, if we are going to rebalance and increase domestic usage of our corn, soybean, other farm commodities, we really need to invest in making sure that we're ready for that transition to happen. Now that could be more domestic usage like renewable fuels. It certainly means that our farm bill, which provides stability for farmers, needs to be updated. It's been 8 years since we passed our last farm bill. It's 3 years past the shelf life. So the folks up the hill here have a lot of work to do to update a farm bill that reflects these new conditions. And how do you do that? Well, you do it through all sorts of ways that we talked about. All that infrastructure needs to be in place, all that education, all that research, all that needs to be in place. We should also have farm policy that can deal with large inventories so that we could do some inventory management like other industries do. We've gone away from that approach. We need to return to it if we expect to deal with a domestic dominated field when we're trying to reset our trade pieces. The other things we need to do is, our farmers rely on USDA services. They're being cut. We're down 20% of our USDA employees. My local office is only open 1 day a week right now as they try to reset all this. All these supports make a big difference if you're going to reset the trade environment. So I'll stop there, but that's some of the things we have to be thinking of as we demand what can make a real difference in our fields and in our pastures all the way down to the farm.
Yeah, thank you. So I've got one more question that I'll pose to the entirety of the panel, and then I will open it up to the audience if you have any questions you guys would like to pose to the panel. So, given all of the changes that have happened in U.S. trade policy in the last 9 months, how have you been thinking about what you are going to do in the short term to address the challenges that you're facing? And then what thought have you given to what sort of long-term adjustments you're going to make in light of a willingness of not necessarily just the Trump administration, but potentially future administrations going forward of using tariffs as a means to achieve other policy objectives that are not necessarily focused on U.S. industry benefits?
Well, I'll jump in on that. It's so important for farmers because we are a very dispersed group, a very diverse group, that we do whatever we can to work together to raise the farmer voice on these issues. We don't always do that, right? We like to praise our farmers, and we take a lot of pride as farmers as being independent and gritty, and you're going to make it by doing better on your farm. And so working together is not always the farmer's first option, right? Usually it's more grit and determination that we think of. But we do need to work together. We do need to have a voice that elevates these issues and take back the authority. Farmers Union decades ago warned that if we give up the authority from Congress to the administration to make drastic decisions on trade, we will come to a day when the president will have a different political agenda that is not in line with the broad thinking around the country. I think we're in that situation. So reclaiming some of that authority that we talked about this morning with Ambassador Tye's, with Trade Representative Tye's comments, I think is where we need to go. We need to reclaim more of that authority.
Thanks, Aaron.
For me, I think for a practical standpoint on the short term, just being smart about inventory purchases, material purchases to essentially just get through holiday, which I'm sure Jenna
Right.
is knows well about. And then in the long term, it's for sure diversifying our supply chain. A lot of our raw goods or materials came from China. We're now looking at South Korea just because the tariffs are less. Timing things so that, we're reaching out. We lost a large account in Canada, but reaching out to them now that the consumer goods tariff has been, I think, eliminated as of early this month. So it's just like it's a lot of it is reactive, and as small business owners, we have so many other things to do. But now it's just sort of on the list of seeing what's in the news. I'm gonna have to. I don't think the 232 tariffs that you mentioned impact us, but now I'm gonna look up what that is because I don't know what that is.
Yeah, I don't think they do either.
Okay, so, but I think it's now it's just like another part of our daily lives, which is really it's just since January, right? That
Yeah.
but it's getting through the short term, but then also for us just like diversifying and just insurance of making sure that we're protecting ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, we're really, the 50% just went into effect in August. So we're scrambling, honestly, trying to figure out how to go day by day. So again, we already we're paying 16 on average, so we're now paying 66% tariffs on our goods. We're already committed. Again, our process takes about a year. So I have lots of things that I've already paid for or paid at least a deposit on that I need to bring into this country for a much greater cost than was planned. So I'm really on the ground trying to figure out cash flow, trying to figure out how I can raise that money, and gambling with price increases. Where am I going to hit my ceiling? Where will the price resistance kick in? And then, will I get paid back for some of those tariffs? Definitely a lot of belt tightening as well, as you were mentioning, Aaron, going on with our business as well as with our manufacturer. How much can we scrimp? How much can we lose, basically? So a lot of just emergency planning at this point in time. We're obviously hoping that the policy changes. It seems unsustainable for many people. We're watching the news religiously. I think, there looked like there were some really positive talks going on last week between India and the USA, and then the HB1 visa news came out, and that really threw everything into a cycle of negative news again between the two countries. So it's a wild ride, but as far as long-term planning, I'd say, right now we're in the emergency planning mode, and we're just not there yet.
One thing that came up, I think it was on a discussion with a Zoom call with one of the other panels. We had somebody had asked Kathleen Clausen on our first panel what happens if the challenge on the IEEPA tariffs is successful at the Supreme Court. What happens with those duties that were paid? And the answer is it goes back to the people that paid the duties. So maybe another possible outcome for Ace and Jig is, my understanding is that the tariffs that are imposed on India are IEEPA tariffs.
Yeah.
If the administration loses at the Supreme Court, maybe you get a refund.
I'll get a refund, but I will
later.
tell you.
But I don't know if I would necessarily count on that.
That would be great. I will tell you that we just got our COVID relief in 2024.
Oh my.
So in 4
Wow.
years.
So,
Wow.
but yeah, it's lots of hope around the Supreme Court case, of course. I'm definitely watching that closely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So we have some time for some questions from the audience. Tim, would you like to pose our first question to our panel?
Thank you, and thanks for sharing your perspectives.
And Tim, I'm just going to say, because we have Rekha on Zoom, she can't hear unless you speak into a microphone. And so to the extent you would like Rekha to weigh in.
So this works for you too? Yeah, okay, good. Well, now I don't see you anymore, so I'm going to do this. Okay. Thanks for sharing your perspectives. Very, very helpful. I have sort of three questions, if I may, very, very quickly. One is, I know it's tricky because it seems to be changing every week, but I was wondering to what extent you actually are feeling yet in your operations and in your own pricing the consequences of these tariffs. I know we talked yesterday evening a little bit about how it's a timeline of up to a year. So you're right now actually working from inventory. I'm wondering sort of when we're going to see the full effect of these tariff policies or these trade policies in your particular lines of business, at least. The second thing is there was sort of some referencing of pushback from other countries, and you, Aaron, referred specifically also to previous episodes. I was wondering sort of how that plays itself out. Are you seeing concrete evidence of that yet? And then specifically, actually, to Aaron, I was wondering what exactly was the problem with the meat labeling that you were talking about and the repairing the machinery. without getting too much into the weeds, but it would seem like that running up against trade law would seem to be a matter of very particular provisions. Thanks.
I wish I could tell you more particulars about that. What on the labeling of meat, there was a WTO ruling that indicated that it violated the trade agreements that we were in, and members of Congress and the administration at that time were forced with either having to face the penalty of that or not enforce the mandatory country of origin labeling of meat. So with that pressure, we have chosen not to enforce that law, and now we've rescinded that law. The right to repair issue is more of one that's being discussed in upcoming trade agreements that deal with with digital applications on equipment that's traded back and forth. I don't know the specifics of that in particular, so I would need to follow up with you, but I'd be happy to. So that's on your third question, but I know you had a couple other questions, and maybe we want to talk about those.
I can speak to your first question, when will we see the full effects of the tariffs on pricing? For us, and I think for a lot of people, depending on where they're working or importing from, it's been up and down. So I think there's been a lot of volatility in the price increases. Peers of ours who mainly make things in China, they had a big increase and they went back down. For us, working with India, we had a 10% increase on Liberation Day. So we adjusted our prices very slightly to account for that. Again, tightening our belts where we could, because our things are already very expensive. So to just continue to add this price on to the American consumer is not a realistic plan either. And then we had the 25%, so the 10% changed to 25%. So again, we went through a whole different price iteration. We made another public-facing announcement, and the 50%, so it's now 16 plus the 50, so 66%, you're gonna start to see that on our prices next month. So we don't know yet how people are going to react to that pretty astronomical price increase. It's a gamble.
I'll just add to your first question. So we have not changed our pricing. We've absorbed some of the expense or the additional price increases from our suppliers. For us, and it's a little bit to what Jenna was talking about, clothing manufacturers that are American made but import their inputs or their materials. For our customer, because being American made is one of our very clear brand values, it's a little bit hard to explain why we would increase our pricing. And so right now, because we have a decent margin, we haven't increased it, though I anticipate that we might have to. On the flip side, and you asked this during our call, we have had, and it's very nominal, the Buy American Act, which is not, it was not through, I think originated maybe within Biden's administration, but it's being enforced under Trump's administration. We've had an increase in purchases from government different departments within the government because we're American made and certified. So that's maybe one small plus for us, but it hasn't made a big impact on our bottom line.
Yeah, I was going to ask, you had mentioned that you had lost a lot of sales in the Canadian market. Mm-hmm. To the extent that you've seen an uptick in U.S. orders on net, do you think that it more than offsets a loss in other foreign markets?
No, it's probably, maybe it makes a small, maybe 5 to 10% of that loss, but not, it's pretty nominal. I mean, I think we might see it over time, but the loss on the international markets it's not, it's a good, about 15%, which is it's a pretty solid number for us.
Yeah, thank you. Aaron?
And on the first question about how are people feeling it now, and are we feeling it yet? Well, so farmers are price takers in this environment. We're hearing from farmers who are having early conversations with their lenders right now to start talking about refinancing for the coming year. Typically, those conversations happen after harvest, and everyone sees what came in and where the market looks like after harvest. They're happening right now, and in very difficult conversations. Farmers are working through whatever equity they have, whatever working capital they have, and trying to calibrate that and see if that will be enough to work with their existing lender. Other indicators we have about the real stress that's out there, we in Iowa and other states, and even some national networks like Farm Aid and others, we have good mental health outreach services. And in addition to those, they refer to good financial advice and other social services that farmers need. The number of calls going into these services is going way up. And so it's an indicator to us that there's an extreme amount of farmer stress on and then the other indicator, which is disturbing, 2024 farm bankruptcies compared to 2025. I just said this backward. In 2025, farm bankruptcies in the first quarter were up 95% from 2024. We don't have those numbers yet for the second quarter, so I can't say how but it is, farmers are feeling the stress. So typically, harvest is a very optimistic time. You get to see what's happening, and with all your work you put in all those decisions you made throughout the year. And there still certainly is that optimism, but this year more than I've seen in many, many, many years, it's tempered with where are we going to put these beans and who's going to buy this corn. So it's a very dour mood this harvest time.
Thanks, Aaron. All right, we would probably have time for one more question if anybody would like to pose. One more question before we conclude. All right, well, please join me in thanking our final round of panelists.